Hello and welcome. I'm Caroline Baum. I'm the ambassador for the Older Women's Network in New South Wales. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, which is the Dharawal land of the Wadi Wadi people here on the south coast of New South Wales. The title of our session today is Chasing Happiness. Now, I think that happiness is a bit of an elusive concept, but that maybe what we're really talking about today, which might be more useful, is stable mental health. I think that that's probably a more realistic objective for most of us. Mental health is taking something of a beating during lockdown, with many people struggling with isolation, loneliness, anxiety, frustration, boredom, inability to join their normal support groups unless those met online, and lots of other issues that really came up in stark relief. So now, as part of Mental Health Month, is the perfect time for us to talk about how we reset and reassess what works to create optimal conditions for good mental health. And I'd like to thank the Inner West Council in Sydney for funding this event. So today we've got two great speakers with us with a wealth of experience in this field. Petrea King will be known to many of you as the founder and CEO of Quest for Life. She's a well-being advocate at the forefront of wellness and resilience training for people recovering from, well, anything really that's manifested as a crisis. It could be illness, it could be addiction, it could be divorce. She's the author of 8 books about how to survive the various crises that life will inevitably throw at you. Meg Smith is a fellow of the Australian Psychological Society, and she's a part-time member of the Mental Health Review Tribunal with a special interest in criminal health and in bipolar disorder. And she's also the founder of the Depression and Mood Disorder Association in New South Wales. So welcome to you both, and welcome to everyone who's joined us for this. We had a very high number of uptake for this session, which I think shows that it's something that's at the forefront of everyone's mind. Maybe mental health for you is something that you're only aware of intermittently when you have little episodes where you feel particularly down and you're not sure how to pick yourself back up again, or maybe you're aware of someone in your community or in your family who's vulnerable and who's experienced more long-term problems. But this is definitely something that seems to be on the radar of many of us. So I thought I would start by asking some questions about lockdown and about what we discovered about ourselves during lockdown that can be useful in this sort of new re-entry phase, and also talk a little bit about some of the new kinds of anxiety that are manifesting for people, in fact, in relation to the very act of coming back out into the world. There are some people who've said to me that they feel a bit socially creaky about re-engaging with people and the protocols of, do I hug people? Do I kiss people? Do I shake hands? When am I wearing my mask? When am I not wearing my mask? When do I feel safe? When don't I feel safe? So we're going to talk about all of those things. And we're also going to talk about some other issues and principles around mental health in terms of public health, public policy, and about, as well as our own self-care. So hope you're sitting comfortably, and here we go. The things that I'm really curious about is, we know as human beings now what's good for us. We know what we should eat, by and large. We know that we should move every day. We know that we need sunlight. We know that we need a certain amount of human interaction. Even those of us that know those things find it very, very hard to maintain the discipline of committing to the consistency of that practice.
Yes.
I'm not even talking about a daily meditation. I'm talking about just going for a walk. I chose during lockdown to self-medicate with dark chocolate. And I could rationalize it by saying dark chocolate is full of antioxidants and it's terribly, terribly good for me. But actually that's kind of crap. So why is it in human nature that even when you know what would make you feel better, you don't do it?
Yes. How human of us. I'm a bit of a fan of suffering because in my experience, it's suffering that gets us to the place where we're willing to say, that's it. Something has to change, and it is me. And because no one's going to come to your front door and check whether you're going for your walk or eating well or meditating or soaking in a bath or any of these things. It's something that each one of us needs to take responsibility for. And you're right, Caroline, it's really hard when you're not motivated and when all the days, you know, during lockdown, all the days kind of blend into each other and weekends kind of disappear. Friday, 5 o'clock sort of disappears as anything meaningful for most people. So I think in my own lifetime, it's been suffering that has generally got me to that hard place. And then it is our job. You know, we get 168 hours every week. I checked it out internationally. Everybody gets 168 hours every single week. And every one of those hours belong to you. And if you feel that other people have claim on your 168 hours, the chances are you could be resenting some that you're giving to other people that you haven't even given to yourself. And frankly, it's our job to divvy up our 168 hours so that we fluff ourselves up first, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, on a daily basis, so that then when the unexpected, the unthinkable, the unimaginable happens, we bring our well-resourced self to the challenge, to the crisis, to the confusion, to the chaos, rather than bringing our slightly depressed, overwhelmed, irritable, intolerant, impatient self to whatever the challenge might be. Now, I know that sounds like common sense, and it is, but it's not easy, is it? Because it's so easy to put other people's needs ahead of our own. Gosh, women are notorious for that. And so we really need to understand that the greatest gift you can give yourself, your partner, your family, your community is the gift of your own good physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, because then you're going to be useful for something.
Okay, wow, that is an amazing, amazing summing up of so many things. Meg, are you a friend of suffering in the same way that Petrea is, or have you chosen another path?
No, I think having had a couple of really serious episodes of depressive illness, I think I now kind of take the view that, look, you know, there's medication around, there's antidepressants, and, you know, I think, I mean, every now and then, yes, I think, okay, you know, something's happening in my life, I need to figure out what it is and what I can actually do about it. But I guess because I have the biochemistry, that means that an emotional or an environmental stress can quickly deteriorate into a biochemical nasty reaction. I mean, it's like, look, you know, if I've got a broken arm, I really don't want to go into too much about why I broke my arm. I really want to get into actually fixing the broken arm. And if that means using, you know, medication and mechanical means, well, then I'll do it. I guess just picking up on a couple of things that Petrea said, I like the idea of that 168 hours, that's fabulous. But I think one of the things I've really noticed during lockdown is all of those kind of what, you know, you regard as inconsequential interactions during the day, saying hello to somebody at the bus stop, smiling at the person, you know, in Woolies, deciding that you're going to have, you know, a sort of cup of coffee and have a sit down and at a cafe and things like that. But and I think it took me a while to sort of recognise that some of those 168 hours were things that I hadn't planned, but were just kind of occurring naturally. And then, of course, during lockdown, they didn't happen. Like, you couldn't go to a cafe and sit down and have a cup of coffee. So, so I think being proactive, and I think, and again, I think Petrea made a really good point that, you know, women do tend to look after other people and put, you know, their own needs second and what have you. And, you know, kind of, and, you know, one of my pals said to me last night, well, she feels guilty for, leaving the family and actually going out for a walk. I mean, they don't want to come for a walk with her, but she does. And I thought, well, okay, guilt is a terrible thing. Sometimes we just have to say, well, okay, if other people are making a choice or not making a choice about their own health, you do actually have to take control of your own mental health and say, well, look, I need to go out for a walk. I need to have some time out. This is something I actually need to do.
Absolutely. That's about boundaries, isn't it? That's about setting boundaries to protect yourself.
And it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. That, we make time for our physical health. Well, we should be making time for our physical health, kind of organising our own meals, organising exercise, organising the way we look, looking after our appearance, etc., etc. But often people don't make time for their mental health, which might be, okay, for example, what are 3 nice things that will happen to you today? Is it going outside to look at the garden? Is it going for a walk? Is it contacting somebody to say hello? Is it treating yourself to a bar of chocolate or what have you? But, and I think when I've been working as a counsellor, I was sort of amazed at the number of people who don't actually plan that. They don't plan a holiday, or they don't plan that, I'm going to have an hour of time out today. That we organise to go to work, we organise for the needs of other people. But often those little incidental things, which are actually fairly important.
That's right. And that's why something like the gratitude exercise, which sounds kind of lame in a way to a lot of people who haven't done it, is such an effective one. And I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert who first taught me that exercise about the jar that you keep by your bed, and you put 3 notes in the jar every night of 3 things that you're grateful for. And it could be that you're grateful for the fact that today is a beautiful day. It could be that you're grateful for the fact that a magpie came to eat from your feeder. It could be the fact that you're grateful that the postman brought you a parcel. I mean, it can be completely mundane and banal, but you train your brain, don't you, to think about small things that can be the source of little moments of joy. We've got a question from someone who's attending today, which is very poignant and which I'd like to just jump straight to. This person says, I feel old and vulnerable when this was not the case before the last lockdown. I'm still very well, but suddenly frightened. Others I've spoken to have had this reaction. Why is this happening? Petrea.
Oh, I think it's a very understandable reaction to what's happened. Our structures, our routines, our connections, our social way of interacting with people. And it is, as Meg said, it's in those little things. It's in the, when you're buying your paper or getting your coffee, or those little moments of connection are tremendously important for us. And I think many people right now are feeling they've had to confront themselves and confront their own vulnerability and their own fears. And I think a lot of people have hit vulnerability in a way that they never expected to. It's like, oh no, I'll just be at home and everything will be okay. But for a lot of people, it's been a very difficult time. And I think there's this harshness that I mentioned before. It could have been done so differently rather than the way it was done. To stop people holding a hand of someone who's dying. It could have been dealt with so much more compassion and sensitivity instead of this authoritarian harshness that was there. They could have called forth the goodness in all of us instead of the way. So I think this vulnerability that people are feeling has also come from that sense of an authoritarian outer influence on their own personal life and the way that they get to interact with their family. And I did want to just touch on suffering. When you're suffering, it's no fun. I know the misery and the depths of suffering. But I've also seen those times have been transformational because they've caused me to find other ways of engaging with life. And that may be medication, absolutely. I'm not anti-medication at all. In fact, I live with neuropathy, chronic pain. I wear pain patches. I'm extremely grateful for those. So you use whatever, but we do need to educate one another about you know, fresh food, going for walks. We know the microbiome is incredibly important. We have a part of the brain in your gratitude exercise. If you start writing down 3 things for which to be grateful, or 5, or whatever it is, whether it's in a book or in a jar, what you're doing is you're training the part of your brain, the reticular activating system, to start looking for what to be grateful for in your life. Whereas if you're always seeing the glass half empty, that reticular activating system in your brain is always looking for the downside. So the moment you start training it to look for the upside, for things to be grateful for, sunshine on my skin, whatever it is, you're actually taking control of a part of your brain, because we've all had our default mode network programmed from our early life. And we operate out of the default mode network, usually until our suffering becomes so great that we get to that place where we say, that's it, I'm out of here, this is too painful. The moment we engage the task positive network, which is another part of the brain, that connects us with our prefrontal cortex, our higher executive functioning. That's where wisdom, insight, intuition, humor, creativity, compassion, all of those juicy, wonderful qualities are accessed through the task positive network. But if we're lost in our default mode network, we're lost in the I'll be happy when story, all our beliefs about life, you can't trust people, you can't trust life, life sucks, whatever it is that we were programmed with when we were young. But we can change our brain. We can use our brain rather than be used by our brain. It makes a great servant, but a shocker of a master.
That's right. And that's the great joy and privilege of the fact that the way we're designed is that neuroplasticity means that the brain can change and we can build new synapses. And if this suggestion of this exercise in gratitude sounds daunting to you and you can't think of 3 things, start with 1. You know, start somewhere, but start with 1. Meg,
in fact, you know, we have at the moment on the if you go to questforlifechallenge.org.au, we're in the middle of a 30-day health and well-being challenge. And it comprises just little habits that we can insert, exactly as you're saying, on a daily basis that can make a profound difference. So we've got lots of people involved in that at the moment. People are very welcome to join in.
Fantastic. Meg, there's another question from an attendee that I'd like to direct to you. It's from Jane Mears. Jane, thank you for the question. She asks, given you were talking about your propensity to experience depression, how did you plan at the beginning of the COVID period to stave off depression or to mitigate it a bit during that time? And were you frightened about the lockdown?
Look, I don't think I even thought about depression and the lockdown in the very beginning, because at the very beginning it just felt like, hey, this is a nice holiday, you know, I don't have to hop on the bus to go to work, and hey, it's kind of pretty neat working from home, and I actually don't mind being on the internet anyway. But then I think when you know, and somebody commented about vulnerability and loneliness, I think when I became aware that everything was so quiet, like there weren't any planes going over, and there was nobody visiting my house, and I wasn't visiting anybody. You know, there's no traffic, you know, and apart from the people walking their dogs and, you know, looking at the street library, you'd go to a shopping centre and there's nobody around. And so that was when I started to think about, well, okay, you know, how do I replace those sorts of things? But I think the other thing is actually knowing my own biochemistry and recognising, you know, what the early warning signs are, like, you know, problems with getting to sleep, problems with staying asleep, problems with sleeping in and what have you. So, so one of the things was actually saying, okay, I need to, you know, do some sleep hygiene things, you know, make sure I go to bed at a reasonable time, make sure that I actually get 8 hours sleep, make sure that I don't sit up till 3 a.m. watching television, tempting though it might be. And just watching the way I was actually reacting to things. I'm like, okay, is this a normal reaction, or you know, would anybody in this situation be feeling panic, you know, when somebody knocks on the door or what have you, or is it you know, sort of a little bit more severe than what I'm comfortable putting up with and what have you.
It's really interesting that you mentioned sort of getting to know your own biochemistry, because I think one of the things that helps is to recognize whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. For me, it was my most extroverted friends, my single extroverted friends, who were the hardest hit. They were going up the walls.
Yeah.
They needed daily phone calls. They needed lots of chivying. The introverts amongst us were going, this is fantastic. So if you don't know, because you've never tested yourself before in any situation to find out whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, then you could be really confused because you've got no way of sort of understanding your own responses to things. So I think what you're saying there about the biochemistry is a really, really good point.
I think the other thing is that, you know, as older women, we've become wiser over the years. And I think, you know, probably for the last 20 odd years of my life, I've thought, oh, well, you know, I know enough about how to cope with things now. You know, I've got a lifetime of experience of, you know, coping with a wide variety of stresses and things like that. But I've never experienced anything like a pandemic. And certainly none of us, I think, expected it to go on for so long. And yesterday, you know, I was told by the Department of Justice, who I work for, that we're not going to go back to face-to-face hearings for tribunals probably until March next year, mainly because the courts are so overloaded, and, you know, they've got to kind of set up everything so that people can keep their distance. But just recognising that, you know, COVID is now endemic. It's not going to go away. And so this is kind of going to be permanent. And it was a little bit of a shock, actually, because I think I've been kind of coasting along saying, oh, well, this is really nice doing my work from home. I love working from home. I've figured out ways to get my sort of social interaction. But, you know, I really would like to go visit, you know, my folks on the North Coast and go to Tasmania and, hey, wow, you know, even leave the country and go to New Zealand or something. And then kind of realising that, well, okay, you know, maybe this isn't going to happen in the next few weeks, and, you know, just kind of adapting. So, and
I think that's very difficult as well for people who like to plan. So if you're a planner, the fact that your plans keep having to be cancelled can be a great cause of stress. Whereas if you have learned, God help us, to live in the moment, which is so difficult, then you roll more easily with the punches and you let things go, don't you? I want to come to you, Petrea, about something that I find very paradoxical, and I'm really hoping that you can explain this to me. I'm sure you're familiar with the happiness curve, and the data on the happiness curve tells us that as we get older, we become more content. Now, to me, this seems counterintuitive, given that as we get older, we have to contend with losing family and friends to death and illness. We confront our own mortality. We may get sick. We may experience loss of hearing, loss of sight, becoming more dependent. We may find we don't have enough super. We may have to care for a partner. All sorts of things might be buffeting the sort of status quo that we've spent decades establishing. So why is it that the happiness curve data tells us that beyond 70 is a great time in our lives, when it seems to me at 62, I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's not what the anecdotal evidence around me shows me.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose if you've lived that long, I turned 70 last week, which was a wonderful joy for me, given that I was meant to die when I was 33 from leukemia. But I think as you get older, you know that, things pass, that life has its challenges, that there are going to be griefs, there are going to be losses, there are going to be all kinds of things, that we're not so worried about other people's opinion of us, which, oh, thank God for that. That's an agony, isn't it? When you're young, worrying about, your effect. I love a friend of mine, Tony Powell, who's often lecturing at the Happiness Conference, and she started off one of her lectures by saying, do you know what other people think of you? Absolutely nothing. They're too busy thinking about themselves. And I thought it was wonderful that most people are so preoccupied with other people's opinion of them in the early part of their life. And as we know ourselves, I think what Meg said before, the key to this is know yourself. Plato said it, it's been going on a long time. If you know yourself, then you know your foibles, you know your strengths, you know what you need, you know what makes your body work and what doesn't. And so you know yourself. And I think for me, that's a great blessing. For me, every day above ground now is a bonus. I wanted also just to mention, we draw quite a distinction between a reaction and a response. And those two words are now used interchangeably in the media. A reaction is always in the body. When we're reacting to someone or something or a circumstance, as we've all been in, we feel it in the gut. Our heart rate increases, our breathing changes. We might hold tension in our jaw, in our neck, in our shoulders. Our head might feel like it's going to burst. It's a reactivation of a physiology that we've experienced before, that we live again in the present moment. And when you ask people when they're in the midst of a reaction, well, don't ask them when they're in the midst of a reaction, but if you think about a time when you were really reacting and you were to ask yourself, how old did you feel? People say somewhere between 2 and 7. And what you are literally doing is reactivating the default mode network, which is very tied in with your primitive brain, your amygdala, your fear center. So it's a reactivation of a physiology that you've experienced before, that you live again in the present moment. A response takes you into new territory. A reaction repeats what you've done before. A response means that you've engaged your TPN, your task positive network, and have access to your neocortex. A reaction is coming out of your default mode network, which is tied in with your primitive brain. If we understand, because we don't say take reactability for your life, we say take responsibility, your ability to respond to the life that you're having, with all of its pain, with all of its suffering, with all of its challenges, its difficulties, its joys, its miseries. But we need to, if we understand how the brain works and how we can be boss of our brain and actually return to our first nature and stop operating out of what's second nature to us. Because it's curious. People say, oh, it's second nature for me to think like this, feel like this, react like this. No one ever questions, well, what's your first nature? What was there before you took on those beliefs, those limitations, that way of seeing the world, those judgments that you hold? Who are you without those? And that's your first nature. That's what enlivens us and connects us to the present moment, where life is. Creation is unfolding in the present moment. So my constant practice is simply to come to my senses, because your body's always here now. It's never in the future, never in the past. And
I love that idea of your first nature, Petrea. That is so poetic and so profound, and I've never thought about it before. That's really beautiful. Thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to keep an eye on them. I'm not going to neglect you, I promise. But I want to shift the conversation slightly for a moment, because we've been talking about ourselves as individuals. And it seems to me that there are some systemic issues that also need to be addressed in this conversation, which are around policies and about how policies are implemented that are meant to protect the most vulnerable people in society. And I'm just wondering, you know, at the moment, there are over 400,000 women over the age of 45 who are currently at risk in one way or another of poverty, homelessness. They may be struggling with domestic violence. They may be dealing with the impact of fear and shame and stress on their mental health. And I'm just wondering, Meg, whether you would like to say something about the policies that we need to address the issues that I've just raised around poverty and homelessness, which are really acute.
Yeah, I think when I trained as a psychologist, and you know, the treatment of choice was cognitive therapy, which really links into what Petrea's talking about. You know, what's your reaction, what's your response, what's a different way of looking at the situation. But then I realised that a lot of the issues were systemic and environmental. That it's all very well to say, I'm terrified of my husband, you know, because he beats me up. Well, changing the thinking about that isn't going to kind of save you from future beatings. So I think, you know, and certainly as I've got older, one of the sort of issues about, well, I'm your older sister, by the way. I'm in my late 70s, early 70s now. So, but I think, you know, the issues like housing security, income, network of friends, safety from violence, discrimination, harassment. These are all issues that women live with on a daily basis, and certainly older women are often much more vulnerable to some of these sorts of things. I mean, it still is the case that even though I have superannuation, nevertheless, when I first started working, you know, my employer, the university, didn't offer superannuation. It was like, oh, well, you're a woman, you don't need superannuation. And besides, you're on contract, you know, you're a casual employee. So we won't kind of, you know, you don't need it. You'll have a man to look after you. So I think women of our generation are still affected by the fact that we don't have the wealth that, you know, men of our age probably, you know, have had. We're much less likely to own our own homes or have a safe space to live. We're much more likely to be supporting family members, certainly emotionally, maybe financially. So, and I think, you know, of the women I see as clients, you know, they often got sent to me, you know, with a kind of their mental health plan, their prescription for antidepressants, and their 12 sessions of psychotherapy from me. And a lot of the time, the system, you know, the problems were insoluble. Discrimination in the workplace, sexual harassment, worry about, you know, future income, worry about who's going to look after me because, you know, I've been looking after other people, but there's nobody around, you know, who's going to be able to look after me. So I think these are very, very real issues. And I think I've become very careful in the counselling I do to make the distinction between, well, you know, what are the things you can change? And Petrea, you rightly pointed out that there's a lot of things we can't change.
That's right.
And, you know, at least kind of being able to look after yourself and changing the things we can is actually really important. But when I organised the support groups for people living, you know, who'd had a serious episode of mood disorder and, well, okay, you know, let's have a self-help group and let's support each other. It became very obvious to me that there were people who needed to kind of sort out, you know, what the hell happened to me and what can I do about it, and needed emotional counselling, emotional support, and how to develop some strategies to stop it actually happening again. But then there are other people who sort of moved beyond that, saying, well, what can we actually do to, you know, to help, like better mental health services, changing legislation, making sure that, you know, there's more economic support and things like that. So we stopped, well, we still ran a support group, so we still do now. The group's now become Bipolar Australia. But we also lobby, and for some people that's been therapeutic, that, okay, I can't change what happened to me, but I can probably change what happens to people in the future. So we got people writing down their stories. We started putting in submissions to governments. We started getting people onto committees. And one of the really good groups I got involved in was the Consumers Health Forum, which was, okay, you know, getting consumers of health services onto, you know, national committees looking at particular health issues and what have you. And that can be incredibly empowering. It's like, well, okay, what can I do today to make me feel better? Sure, it might be taking a walk in the garden, but maybe it's writing a letter to my local member of parliament. Maybe it's, you know, writing to, putting in a submission, you know, about changes and putting in a complaint or something like that. So there were kind of active things you can do. And I remember in the very early days when, you know, the atomic bomb was going to kind of like, you know, remember sort of mutually assured destruction, the mad kind of, well, you know, we'll bomb you and you'll bomb us and everybody will be dead, you know. And I was a young psychologist at that stage, and I remember thinking a lot of the sort of young people I was counselling were feeling really hopeless. What's the point of doing anything? Because we're all going to be blasted to smithereens, you know, fairly shortly. And then I started noticing that, you know, we had these huge demonstrations, Hiroshima Day, thousands and thousands of people, you know, got out in the streets, and people voted. And I think it was Germany where they actually changed the government, you know, on the sort of platform of, you know, well, we don't want nuclear bombs, you know, we want decent kind of living and things like that. And it started to, and I thought, well, yeah, you know, people power is actually really important, that I as one individual, you know, probably can't do very much, but I can do something. And if thousands and thousands of us do something, well, then something will get done.
Well, and also you're shifting focus. So the moment you shift focus from yourself to looking outward, that seems to sort of have incredible benefits. I mean, it's the self-absorption that is such a curse of depression that prevents people often from looking outward and makes them feel paralyzed. But when you get a little chink of light where you think for a moment that you could do something for someone else, the payoff is actually quite considerable. I wanted to ask you, just sort of carrying on from what you're talking about there, and I'd like to come to carers in a moment, because I get a sense that there are a lot of carers in our audience today who are concerned about, you know, how they balance and juggle their responsibilities for others with their own mental health well-being. I'm very struck anecdotally by the fact that there seems to be a real shortage of psychologists who specialize in older people. Whenever I meet an older person, whether they're in a care home or whether they're living independently, and they say that they suffer from anxiety or loneliness or depression, they do not seem to be able to get a referral to a gerontologist, psychologist. Do we have an acute shortage of this particular category, and what can we do about it?
That's a good point, actually. And I think amongst my psychologist colleagues, I mean, certainly some of us are in our later years, so we're certainly probably got the lived experience, if you like. But then I think, well, you know, I think amongst my network, a lot of us who do work with older people, we're probably involved in sort of policy making or research rather than actually kind of doing, you know, the face-to-face counselling. But it's actually a really good point, and I think it's probably worth maybe lobbying the Australian Psychological Society to actually look. But look, I think there's another issue there, and that is that, I mean, I've been involved in the mental health area now sort of since the 1980s, and it's always struck me that we've still got the focus on the YAVIS phenomena, the young, attractive, verbally intelligent, sophisticated person who is going to really respond to, you know, counselling and support, and they've got their whole life ahead of them and they're bright. You know, there's going to be a terrible waste if they don't, you know, kind of realise their potential, etc., etc., etc. And we're kind of still doing that. I mean, okay, look, you know, it's important to have help and support to young people, because, you know, the onset of serious mental health issues does in fact happen in adolescence, early adulthood. But I think it's been a real struggle to provide services for older people. And I guess when I see on the guardianship tribunal people going into a nursing home or something, you say, well, okay, so, you know, a decision's going to be made about accommodation, but what about services? Oh, but they'll be getting all the services at the nursing home. Well, will they actually be getting all the services like access to a diversional therapist or physiotherapy or psychotherapy or emotional support or what have you? You know, will they actually get those actual kind of supports? And I think we don't. And my first psych hospital admission, I was in my 30s, and I kind of became aware that, you know, like there's 25 people in the psych ward that I was in. And probably half of them were women, probably over the age of 45 or 50, which I regarded as old then because I was only in my 30s, right? But it just seemed to me that older women just weren't getting the amount of time and input from the staff. It was like, oh, well, by the time you get to your 40s or 50s and you've had a few hospitalisations, there's really nothing much you can do. You know, it's like just give them the medication and you know, give them 3 meals a day and, you know, send them home basically.
Absolutely.
And that was when I really decided, okay, you know, I don't want that to happen to me when I get older, that they're just going to say, oh, well, you know, she's chronic, you know. We're not going to kind of, you know, put it. And I don't think we really have much in the way of research into older people and mental health. And I remember we often see people on the Mental Health Review Tribunal who have what's called pseudo-dementia, basically. And, you know, so you get a letter from the GP saying, oh, no, you know, she's got dementia, senile dementia, you know, like you can be in your 60s and have senile dementia, and it turned out that often this was, in fact, depression, that, you know, all of the kind of life issues that people face, insecurity of accommodation, you know, death of a partner or death of family members and what have you, and you go into a depression. And depression looks pretty much like dementia. Yeah, you know, you don't engage, you don't want to eat, you don't feel like doing anything, you don't have much in the way of conversation. So people were often being slotted into the dementia wards and nothing much was done until, you know, there was some research about, hey, this is depression, it's treatable. You know, counselling, emotional support and medication does in fact make a huge difference to people's lives. And look, frankly, with the COVID stuff, I mean, you know, sure, I was probably grateful that, you know, because I'm in my 70s, I was eligible for, you know, the AstraZeneca dose and things like that. But it did feel to me at the time that, well, okay, we know there's some problems with the vaccine, but look, you know, older people are going to be more vulnerable to this, dying from this thing anyway. So it's okay to give them the, you know, the vaccine that probably has a few more problems than the other ones.
Well, that's right. I mean, that goes to what Petrea was saying about the sort of harshness of the public discourse and the fact that in a way we were made to feel that older people were some kind of collateral damage and that, you know, they had pre-existing medical conditions. Well, then, you know, all bets are off and, you know, too bad. I just want to come to the issue of carers, because it seems to me that there's quite a strong cohort of carers represented here today. And Petrea, I don't know whether you see a lot of carers who come through the Quest for Life program for respite and a kind of sense of support and renewal, but it seems to me that the mental health and well-being of the carer population is really significant for the older women who are here today, because we are the ones who often are the so-called sandwich generation now, where we may be looking after grandchildren and grandparents at the same time and be completely wedged between them. So there's a question here, for example, from Lynn McIver. How do you cope when the needs of others are overwhelming and you cannot walk away because those in families are not taking responsibility? There are so many tensions that are not acknowledged about the role of the carer. The carer has such a low status in our society. So Petrea, can you say something about your observations around what carers need to preserve their mental health?
Oh, look, it's a complex issue and you can't sort of sum it up in 5 minutes, but we work a lot with carers. Both they come to our general programs, but we also run many, many programs for organisations of carers. So it might be carers of people with dementia or carers of kids with disabilities or with autism or whatever. And, you know, these are such wonderfully good-hearted people who are so unused to being cared for, because their whole focus is on caring for someone else. So when we take them away for a few days and remind them of their own value, their own intrinsic value, not their value as a carer, but their value as a human being. And, you know, I think this is something that's missing so much, and we need so many more women in positions of power and positions of policy making, because it's the women who know about caring. And this is you know, not to say men don't, because I've met some extraordinary male carers as well. But women know this is something that's innate to us. We produce more oxytocin, you know, this is more natural and to us. So it's the same thing. There are only 168 hours in the week, whether you're a carer or someone in need of care, and that the carer also needs to divvy up their time so that they replenish themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because no one else will do it for you. And it might mean you have to get up half an hour earlier. It might mean you go to bed half an hour earlier. It might mean that you have that cup of tea where you stare into the distance, but you acknowledge, this is me just taking some me time, because we all need to replenish ourselves so that we can bring that replenishment to others. And I know one of the things we'd love to do at Quest, because we've got the land to do it, is to build, you know, co-housing and group housing opportunities where you could have some common areas and a common kitchen, but you could also have your individual private little townhousey kind of affairs, so that you can have company, you can have privacy. And, you know, we need to come up with these new housing possibilities for people, especially older women, because it's our largest growing cohort of homelessness is single older women. And they have a wealth of life experience to give. And, you know, if we brought people together in these relatively cheap accommodation situations so that they could support one another and work in the gardens, grow flowers, grow veggies, be there for one another, and have support nearby that is there for the times when we need it. But we need to come up with so many creative ways of addressing the problems that we have now, and we can't expect it to come from the government. I mean, really, it's not going to happen there. It's going to come from, all change comes from the grassroots. We need to be the change that we want to see in the world, because it's not coming to rescue us. We're it.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing some really exciting models coming out of Germany, Scandinavia, France. I'm sure you know about the wonderful feminist collective in France called the Baba Yagas. There are so many of these really inspiring stories, and increasingly models of intergenerational housing where students get cheap accommodation, but they're sharing a home with an older person who's maybe a little bit lonely. Of course, there are all sorts of concerns that one has about trust and about vetting. So all of this has to be very carefully set up. But I think the possibilities are actually really exciting. And there are models there for us to borrow now from other countries. I wanted to ask you something about character and personality, Petrea, that several people mentioned to me when I was kind of drawing up a list of questions for today. Several people said, do you think that our fuses are shorter? Are we all more impatient now. You know, when you look, for example, in a big city like Sydney at manifestations of road rage, there seems to be a kind of trigger or a very short fuse where the slightest stepping out of line or misdemeanor you cop abuse for. So what is going on? Do you think that we are a culture of exceptionalists? You know, I'm different because I get to jump the queue because. Are we all more entitled? Are we all thinking too much about ourselves as individuals? Have we lost sight of the collective because we're living in a pretty brutal era politically where the collective doesn't have a very high priority? Otherwise, we would be talking about climate change. So what's happening to us?
I think a lot of people are at the end of their tether. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when you're at the end of your tether, you're reacting out of your default mode network and whatever you've laid down in there through your early experiences of life. And just recently, because of the lockdowns, we've all had all of our normal distractions taken away from us. And we've had the mirror held right up to our own beliefs, our own judgments, our own way of doing life. And that hasn't been a very pleasant experience for a lot of people. And they've either ended up not sleeping so well, abusing drugs and alcohol a little bit too much, not really looking after their nutrition, not going for that walk. And, you know, one of the things we do at Quest, we get people into groups of 3 and we get them to do a brain dump. What are all the things you do when you're at the end of your tether? I'm intolerant, impatient, I am more judgmental, I isolate, I withdraw, I swear, I cry, all of the things that you can imagine, get headaches, diarrhea, nausea, whatever it might be. And when you look at that list, they're all the symptoms of not being present. This is when you've got an emotional backlog that you haven't dealt with. And we get them back and we suggest write up your half-dozen favourite ways of manifesting stress so you know that about yourself. When you stop answering the phone, when you find yourself still at the telly at 3 a.m, when you, whatever it is, you're not sleeping so well, you're not eating that well. So know what your triggers are to show that you're at the end of your tether. Then we get them back into groups of 3, and this time they look at what are the activities, the environments, the things that you do or that you have in your life where you feel a sense of peace, you feel a sense of connection to yourself, being in nature, listening to music, singing, dancing, ritual prayer, yoga, all fresh flowers. There's sensory, often sensory things, looking at the night sky, and meditation, obviously. So when you look at all of these things, being in nature, your pets, being with your grandchildren, children never come up, but being with your grandchildren comes up. When you look at all of these things, these are all present time activities. These are all things that we love to do because we're in the present moment. In the present moment, there is no suffering. It's when our brain starts, you know, it's like if it's raining outside, some people will wake up and say, oh, I'm going to be depressed because it's raining and I'm going to spend the day in bed. Someone else will be like, oh, I love these days, I'm going to get out and jump in puddles. The rain just rains. How we feel about the rain is up to us, and we can have an influence on that. And so I think a lot of this is we need to educate people about how the brain works and how we get laid down with these default programs very early on in life that are second nature to us. But as you said earlier, Caroline, you know, the neuroplasticity shows us that the brain can change throughout our lifetime. So you're not a helpless victim of your history. And we can be co-creators of our experience. But it does mean we have to be more conscious to build in those things that we know replenish us. Good food, you know, exercise. I mean, I was in tears last night when I see these poor detainees holed up in a hermetically sealed hotel in Melbourne with no fresh air, no sunshine, and we know vitamin D is a deficiency and is seriously a problem for people with COVID. We ought to be encouraging people, get your vitamin D levels up, get exercise, eat really well, because there are lots of things you can do to build your immune system, and pretty much isolating and getting out of the sun's the other end of the spectrum. And here, when they showed the food, there wasn't any fresh food. It was all packet stuff in packets. And here's this poor man in tears calling an ambulance, and they won't even let the ambulance in. I cannot believe this is the country I grew up in. This is not how we want to live. We want a compassionate and socially aware community of people who take care of each other. And we have seen an appalling demonstration of the opposite of that over the last 2 years, starting with the bushfires.
Yeah. I would say this goes back way further, Petrea. I would say this goes back to the beginning of the Howard years, and that this was about creating a country that was, as he put it then, relaxed and comfortable, but for, you know, the chosen few, leaving a lot of vulnerable people excluded. Exactly. And that this has now become a very entrenched position of absolutely callous indifference to the most vulnerable people in society. And I think, you know, I don't know what the data is. I don't know what both of you see come across your desks, but it seems to me that this epidemic of depression that we're experiencing at the moment, surely it is symptomatic of a societal malaise about the things that as a nation we are not reconciled to. We are not reconciled to our First Peoples. We are not reconciled with our torture policy towards refugees. These things are being done in our name. So it's not surprising if some of us feel very, very bad about this stuff. So, you know, some people say, oh, stop watching the news. You know, that will only depress you. Well, the news sometimes forces you to ask yourself, am I being complicit in terrible things? So I'm not quite sure about the business of switching off the news. Can you just perhaps comment on this societal malaise about policies that are being enacted that make us feel ashamed of our country?
I think one of the things is we need to recognise who the real enemy actually is. And, you know, remember Hamish Abernathy saying this in the Hunger Games, the Katniss Everdeen. When you're out there, you just remember who the real enemy is. It's not your fellow victims. It's actually the whole machinery of the state that's actually putting all of you into this killing arena. And I think, you know, we've seen a number of examples of really blame the victim. Well, you know, if you don't have enough money in retirement, it's because you didn't save hard enough. Well, you know, refugees and asylum seekers, well, they should have known they shouldn't have come to Australia in the first place. Well, you know, okay, it's the supermarket, you know, fault for getting us to kind of check in and asking us to wear a mask. So the poor employers kind of cop it. And, you know, when people are feeling powerless and don't know how to bring about change, or there's just no opportunity to bring about change, we hit out at the people who are closest. And I think one of the issues for carers is that they often cop a fair bit of that brunt, actually, that, you know, you're caring for someone who's, you know, pretty disadvantaged, you know, powerless in their own situation. So one of the kind of refrains I often hear from carers is, you know, they get the blame, you know, for the services not being provided or what have you. And similarly, I think, you know, for workers on the ground, you know, the support workers and what have you, well, you know, and we're hearing, of course, from healthcare staff who are getting pretty burnt out by COVID, and, you know, there's, you know, even getting to the point of saying, well, if you're not going to get vaccinated, well, don't expect to get good care from us when you end up in hospital. It's kind of like, you know, we kind of hit out at the sort of softest target, if you like. And okay, you know, one of the strategies, I guess, I've kind of learned is, okay, well, you can make the target harder. So look, you know, I am not your punching bag. I am not going to put up with this kind of behaviour. But that still doesn't solve the wider problem of, you know, something actually needs to be done. So I think,
and good leadership that's enlightened and compassionate.
Yeah, indeed.
Petrea, is there anything that you wanted to add to that? Because I'm going to ask you, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask you for some takeaways. You've actually both given us quite a few, but was there anything else that you wanted to add to that sort of comment about the sort of societal malaise? And, you know, you were talking about your concern about the refugees on television.
You know, I think it falls to each of us to do those things that we've talked about. Take good care of your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. That doesn't actually take terribly long. And then once you've replenished yourself, what else is there to do but be in service in some way to life? And I'm not talking anything in neon lights. I'm talking it's in the love we put into the food. It's if we're preparing a meal, it's into how we tend a garden, how we tend our friendships and our relationships. It's in, as Meg said before, it's in the little things that are actually the really big, important things. So never underestimate, you know, even a smile, a thank you, making eye contact. And now, of course, we've all had to learn to smile with our eyes, given you can't see anyone's mouth. And, you know, we have to sort of make an extra effort really to connect with people. I see you, because a lot of people are not being seen, they're not being heard. And that hurts us in our depths, because we are social creatures and we're far more than our human form, in my belief. You know, I've been with many, many people when they pass, and to me, it's really obvious someone leaves and you're left with this shell of a body. So I think we've got so caught up in the material and in the physical and in control and so many things that go against the heart. And we really need a huge injection of compassion and empathy and understanding. And these are often qualities that women hold quite naturally. And we have to look out for each other. We have to care for one another. And that's why I'm keen to see groups of women come together and support each other in these new ways of dealing with issues and problems. Women's circles are so powerful. I know, Meg, you know, you've run lots of support groups. I've run thousands of support groups, and I know the power, and it doesn't lie in the facilitator, it lies in the people who are present. They are a gift to one another. And if we can create these circles, women's circles, where women come together to solve some of their own problems in creative and ways that we can't even imagine at the moment, there is hope. But hope has to have legs. It has to be underpinned by effort. It's not enough to hope that things are going to get better, because if we leave it to the powers that be, they are not going to get better. We are the ones that need to step in. And at a time where we might think we're stepping out or stepping down or stepping sideways, this is the time where older women in particular need to step up, because you do have wisdom, you do have life experience, you know about suffering because you've had it in your life and you've grown through that, you've flourished hopefully through that. And we are the ones who need to speak up at this time and be heard by each other at least.
Well, I think we've all been listening today. I think we've been hanging on your every word, Meg and Petrea. I hope that we've answered some of the questions, some of the many questions that came through during the course of this conversation. And I can't help but feel that the Older Women's Network is precisely the kind of compassionate group of wisdom and experience that can take a leadership role in this kind of reset and rebalancing as we
Absolutely
go forward in this sort of post-lockdown era. So I hope that those of you who've been watching today will have found some new sources, perhaps of, if not happiness, which I do think is perhaps a little bit of an unhelpful word, maybe contentment, maybe purpose, maybe meaning and fulfillment are the words that we're after here. I would like to thank both Meg and Petrea very, very much for the generosity of their empathy and their wisdom and their experience and their humor. I feel very inspired. I hope you do too. I hope you're going to go off and have a wonderful rest of today and at least a very good night's sleep. I wish you all a very good night's sleep. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.